Hey guys! So this video is a live recording from my Retouching.0 panel for Photoshop. I'll be discussing each category from top to bottom and letting you know what you should do once you've run each of these buttons. This isn't an in-depth tutorial, so I'm not going to be lingering on any of the specifications of how to retouch. This is strictly to show you how you can speed up your workflow using this panel. So you may have noticed that my panel changed colors. That's because this color wheel here isn't just for looks. When you click on it, you can customize the panel color to your liking. Sometimes I like to choose a color from my photo that I'm working on so that if I'm doing a video, it kind of matches and everything looks cohesive. So the first category we have is file setup. Here's where I have the bit depth and color space, and if you're going to do any pre-liquifying before you start retouching. You'll know the panel's working if you can see an actual number here in this box. You can see that it says 16-bit for mine, and if you look up here it does say 16, which means I am in 16-bit depth. Then over on the right side we've got Adobe RGB, sRGB, and ProPhoto. So these are the three main color spaces that most people use. If you're using something else, it might just show up as color space here. But using these drop downs, you can actually click and change the color space or the bit depth of your photo. So if you look up here where it says 16, when I switch to 8, now it's 8-bit. Same thing with the color space. Down here at the bottom, I actually have it so that it shows me sRGB. But if I were to click Adobe, there's Adobe RGB 1998. This liquify button is a little bit different from the old panel because I decided that when I was working, sometimes I didn't want to liquify the image I was on, and I didn't want to have to create a merged copy, so I created a separate button for it. So if I'm on this image right now, on this bottom layer, and I click liquify this layer, then it will change the layer that I'm on. But if I wanted to do a merged copy, it actually creates a new layer above that, and it kind of stamps everything that's beneath it and then opens up liquify. To the right of the liquify button is my new favorite button, which is my side-by-side view. So if you ever find that you're retouching maybe a little bit too much, I have this side-by-side button to hopefully help you be able to look at it on the left side after you've made the changes up close, so that you can have control, but also be able to see what the full image will look like. So once I click this, you'll see that it popped the image right over here, and another one to the right. For me personally, I like to also just kind of save some of my screen space by dragging that over there and maybe pulling this back a little bit. But you can see that each stroke that I make, it doesn't show up as I'm drawing, but the second I lift my pen, it goes over to the other side. So that way, if I was, working on these here, I could look over and see if I really needed to go any further into detail. Moving on to frequency separation, I have both a quick setup and a manual setup. Now the quick setup is really more for when you kind of need to do a bunch of proofs for somebody and you do want it to kind of soften their skin a little bit, but you don't really want it to fully edit the photo. If you don't have a really great system, don't really try to run it on high-res photos. It's mainly meant for sort of smaller thumbnail almost photos. And on a future update, I'm going to have a quick button there that you can actually create a copy and size it for previewing purposes. I'll start with the quick setup just because it's not so unique as far as the manual setup. So when I hit quick setup, we've got the actual quick setup button here, which is required first. And then afterwards you can adjust the amount that was blended, the texture, and the contrast. Now, like I said, I don't really want to do this to a large photo, so I'm going to take it down. So quick setup, I hit play or click the button, and it's done. Very fast compared to if you were trying to do it on a high-res photo. So now what happens here is it creates a folder with some adjustments, and it creates a black mask. So what I'm going to do is I grab the paintbrush here. I know it's on the other side too, but when you have a really big monitor, sometimes it's nice to have them on both sides. So I've got the paintbrush, and then right here I have some presets. This one I use for dodge and burn or some frequency separation with a little bit more control. It's a low opacity and soft. This one's also soft, but it's at full opacity, and I use it for masking in things very boldly. Then to the right of those, I've got two different textures, one for smaller texture and one that's more for like a shining spot or something. I'll go over those later. So I've grabbed my full flow mask, and here's what you see as I paint over the skin. You're not going to see too much happening, which is pretty good because, you know, her skin's already great, so we don't want to see her turn into a cartoon. And I am not being careful at all. I'm just scribbling kind of all over the place. So we'll see how it looks. Now I can already tell that it's more on the neck than I need it to be, and so maybe I would run it 2 separate times if I was really being picky, but here is the before and after with nothing adjusted. So yeah, it does get rid of a lot of features, but it does a pretty good job compared to some other plugins, and it's customizable. So once we've got that part done, first, if you're to go in and actually select the blend layer that's inside, you can adjust the fill here. So for a more natural look, I would probably only put this at around 30 or 40%, and that way it just kind of does a nice softening of the harsh shadows that hit her nose and stuff like that. Again, this isn't really meant for full retouching, it's more meant for your preview purposes. Now, if you are doing it on a high-res photo, then you'll definitely want to use these adjustments that are in here, because the bigger your photo is, the more you're going to have to blend in order to get it to actually look like this. And this one doesn't really need it, but I would like to show you those things now. So I'm going to bring the fill kind of all the way up. And first we'll do a blending adjustment. So it opens up surface blur, so you do need to know something about surface blur in order to do this one. And you can see that it sets the radius at 40 and 25 to begin with. This is just kind of based on those smaller images, like I said. And you can kind of see how it's blurring things on that low layer for you. So if you're noticing that it's taking away too much, then you can either lower the threshold, or you can lower the actual blurring radius. Threshold is like how many pixels it's picking up, and the radius is like how far it's pushing it. And I do have it so that you can preview it as you do it here, but for me personally, I find it sometimes easier to actually look at this box and see how everything's blending. And when you hide and show the preview, it looks pretty bad because it actually has the high layer amplified over the top now, so you're seeing way too much texture. But once it's on, it looks pretty good. So I'm gonna click OK. And now I can show and hide that layer, and you can see what's happening. Now it actually does sharpen a little bit too, which I find is good for doing those preview purposes when they're gonna be really small. So it gets that out of the way. All right, so the next button there is the texture adjust. So once you've blended, you can actually still adjust the texture. So if I click on that, now here's a little weird way of looking at it. A lot of people like to see the actual kind of high pass layer that's happening. I personally, again, like to actually look at what's being blurred, because once you know frequency separation well enough, you know that the more that's being blurred in certain areas, the more that's actually being retained. So I am looking here, but for everybody else who likes this, I've got it so you can see what it looks like here. So you can see what texture you're putting on the high layer. Definitely saved a lot of the texture. In fact, it bumped it up a little bit with how high I put it. I've never put it that high before. You can see that I created some pretty heavy shadows here. cool thing is, if you just hit Control Z or Command Z, then it'll actually revert to what you had it before, so you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about creating a copied layer or anything. Okay, so I'm back to this original one because I did like it, and the other one was a little bit too contrasted for what I would do next to show you, which is the clarify contrast. So when you run that, you can choose to look over here again or here. I do look on the right side for this. On the left side, I mostly am trying to look for haloing. I'm going to zoom out to see where I see the most haloing, and it's definitely around the eyes and a little bit on the cheekbone there. So I think what I'm going to do is you kind of have a couple ways you can go about this. If you take the radius down, you're going to get that more sharp look. So it's going for the smaller textures. Or you can really bump it up and you can give yourself like a sculpted sort of look. And you can see that it definitely added some depth. Let me pull this one. I don't know why I let it get so small on that side. Yep, so it brings back some nice depth. So if you did end up over flattening, but you don't really feel like going through all the process, sometimes this can help you pull back at least some of the depth. And like I said, not really meant for full retouching. This is just sort of so that people don't have to see maybe their skin before the retouching, so they fall more in love with it. Right, so once it's done, you can, I choose to merge it. I don't always keep tons of layers, but usually I'm pretty confident in what I'm doing, so I will just hit Control E and merge this into its own thing. I will keep the mask though, just in case. Alright, so I'm going to hide that layer and I'm going to go to the liquify again, and I'm going to hit manual setup. Now under the manual setup, we've got the 3 different methods that I prefer to use for setting up my frequency separation. So if you've never done frequency separation before, you don't really have to learn much because the panel does it for you. What you mainly have to know is that when you're setting your blurry amount, that's going to be the low layer where you can paint or clone or do nothing at all for those who are very much dodge and burn addicts. You can just set it up and work on the high layer. So I have Gaussian blur as the sort of easy method because there's really only one thing you have to control and it blurs everything equally. Median is based on an algorithm that Photoshop has. I prefer to use this one 99% of the time. So then we have surface blur, which again, you really got to know how to work that in order to know what you're saving and what you're making adjustable on the low layer. So I'm just going to run median. You can see it brings the pop-up for me to choose my radius. Okay, so you can see that it sets up frequency separation for you. So I have these labeled so that you kind of know what to do if you're new to frequency separation. Most of the time people use healing, cloning, and patch on the high layer, which is why I actually have these quick buttons here for spot healing, regular healing, which is the good one, and cloning and patch. And then on the low layer, I have paint, blend, and clone. But I also do like to use healing and patching on the low layer lately. I find it actually makes it a lot more natural looking when you're getting rid of blemishes if you can use the healing. So for that, I've also got the paintbrush and the mixer brush right here. Okay, so I'm going to show the texture layer again and just show and hide what I did. And already I feel like it's made a nice impact. So then, like I said, on the high layer is where you would also heal, clone, or patch, and that's just for your texture fixes. So I'm just going to fix a couple things right now. Alright, so I'm going to show you another method in case you didn't want to do any of the manual tools like the healing, the clone, the patch, or painting with a paintbrush. So I have all of those tools up here, which is like more of the professional manual use, but down here I do have sort of a system that I can't say I came up with it, but I didn't really see it done properly. So it kind of goes back to an old method of frequency separation, only I sort of modified it to fix the problem that everybody was having. So I just call it the lasso method. And I'm going to show it on actually another photo that I have open. Okay, so I'm going to choose my median again for my frequency separation. And this is definitely not the professional way of going about this, but if you've got a large number of photos to do and if you're careful, it can do a pretty decent job. So on your low layer, if you take your lasso, what you're going to do is you're trying to blend now. You're trying to figure out where things need to blend together, where they're kind of harsh. So first, before doing anything, I would have actually lightened this up here because I don't want to accidentally pull any of that really dark color into the rest of her cheek. Now, I see a bunch of kind of discoloration down here on her jaw, and hopefully I didn't hide too much of the texture. As you can see, when I hide that, I can still see that it's a little mucky there. So I'm gonna keep that showing so I can see what it looks like, and what I'm gonna do is just use my lasso to select, and then I'm going to hit blend, and then you've got 3 different kinds of blend: Gaussian blur, median, and dust and scratches. Median tends to take a lot of your graphics cards, so you know, if you don't have a great system, I would just stick with Gaussian blur. And I will for this video because I already have a lot of programs running for this video. Okay, so if I show and hide the preview, you can see that down here on the jaw, it has spread out that color a little bit, and I could amp it up even more. And this is what I would prefer to do if I was going to use this method. I would build it up so that it's actually bigger than it needs to be, and then either double clicking and changing the blending properties, or by actually masking out, I would kind of take it away from the shadow area so that I can keep my definition. But I'll show you real quick what it can look like if you are, if you're just kind of using this method real fast. And the reason I said oops is because I just hit Command or Control E, which I'm used to, but there actually is this merge button here. So if I were to go to a different section of the face, but it's kind of the same size, I could test my luck, and instead of hitting blend and having to choose again which kind, I can just hit repeat. So once you hit repeat, I'm going to show and hide it, and you can see what's happening under her eye. And if I'm happy with it, I'll merge. Again, I'm just going to do this real fast across the photo. Alright, so I'm going to skip down to dodge and burn now. And under dodge and burn, I've got 3 setups right now. I have soft light, curves, and screen and multiply. I think I only know one person who actually uses the dodge and burn tool. I think it's weird. So unless a bunch of people want me to add it, I'm just going to keep these 3 because I think they kind of got it covered. So when you hit soft light, it's not a gray layer because in case you like to make adjustments based on where you drew, like let's say I put something here and here and here, instead of using 2 layers with curves or screen and multiply, the soft light just uses 1, where if you're bold, you can just use this to reset your swatches to black and white and just start dodging and burning with black and white on that same layer. But if you're thinking that maybe the colors are getting a little bit distorted or something, you can choose to say just burn like I did, and if you hold control and you click on that layer, it creates a selection, and then let's say it wasn't saturated enough and I wanted to pull up a hue and saturation slider, then I can adjust it based on what I've done. So then same for curves, screen and multiply, they kind of run their own thing, and with the curves and the screen and multiply, it puts them in folders with a separate layer for dodge and burn. So they've got black masks, and you just use your soft brush and paint white over them. And like I said, I just have this reset swatches here because sometimes I don't realize that I've got green or something and I start painting and it doesn't really work. It switches it over to gray and then all heck breaks loose. So screen and multiply, the same thing. It looks like it's just a regular curves, but it actually isn't running a curve. It's just screening and multiplying in the blend modes. So just to show quick with the curves, I will dodge under those eyes again. Now let's say you're having some trouble seeing the differences and you're not really sure what you need to do. Maybe some things stand out, but other things are pretty hidden. So I have these helpers here, and originally it was just kind of a basic helper, but some people needed to see a little bit more than others, so I also have a heavy version. So if I run normal, you can see that it kind of gives you that chrome type look, and what it's trying to do is sort of compress the contrast of the image so that you can better see where any patches are. But again, if the person has freckles, you should still be careful where you're gonna do everything. Alright, so that was with my color adjustment loaded. Now let's say I didn't have anything loaded on top, and let's say this was too bright. I'm trying to see a little bit more on the forehead. Well, you can open up the Dodge and Burn helper and you can adjust the opacity or fill of the contrast or the darkness. So you can choose to completely take it off or amp it up even more. And on a future update of the panel, I'll have a little separate box for doing an inverted black and white. I can't stand that stuff, but a lot of people use it, so I need to add it. But I hate it so much. Alright, so just to show what I'm looking for, moving on to quick layers. So this top bar here will show you which layer is going to be affected by whatever button you click down here. So if let's see, I'll just merge this here. So if I wanted to create an empty layer that had the blend mode color, I would have empty selected and hit color. You can see that it created a new one and it set it to color for me. It also changed the title, so it helps me remember. Now, if you were on a layer that you didn't want to make a new one, you can just choose this layer. So that's what this is. It's saying to make an adjustment change, basically. You're going to change the blend mode of this layer. And then, of course, copy would be to actually duplicate the one that you're on and then change it to this blend mode. So they come in handy when you're kind of making last minute adjustments constantly and you just need to keep picking away at them and you don't want to have to look through this long list here. So just to show an example of one that I might do, I'll create a copy and set it to, let's see, for fun we'll go with linear dodge. Now linear dodge and I think overlay and soft light, I think they do a little something different. I can't quite remember if I coded all three of them, but I know a couple of them will actually run it in a different way because it looks a little bit better when you use the image. So now I can show you these texture brushes. So again, we have just the soft brush here, full opacity, and then we've got this tiny texture. There we go, showing some buildup. And harsh texture. I'm not sure why my brush always does full opacity at first. These brushes, when you slide your Wacom, if it have angle sensitivity, it'll actually change the shape of the texture. So you can see that over here I went a little bit sideways to show that it would bend it. If you're having some trouble getting whatever color you're using to show up, you may need to, for now until I update it, go into the brush settings here, and if color dynamics is selected, just go ahead and uncheck it, and then it should be a lot easier. Alright, so just to show some kind of something here with these brushes, I'll just paint some texture here really terribly. And then I'll change its blending mode so it fades in. Not a great job, but it gets the point across. Actually, I like how it looks on this camera right cheek, but not so much the left. So again, just like quick layers, how it has the empty, this, and copy, for this, depending on each layer, if it already has a mask or if it's empty, you're going to either add to the mask, completely replace the mask, or subtract the mask. So I'm just going to start with replace. There's no mask here, but if my coding is correct, it should create one. So when you hover over luminosity and hit create masks, it creates a whole ton right here for you. Now this is good for doing color adjustments, whether it's for skin tone or color grading. Now that it's got the masks, I'm going to hit apply, and again it's going to replace, so it should add one here. And let's say, oh, you know what, I'm actually going to create an adjustment, pull my shadows. I'm just going to go crazy and see what happens. Let's go crazy. And I'm going to say I want it to be colored, so I went this color. Yeah. Let's start with that. Okay, so I'm going to go apply, and let's put this on the shadows. Great, so you can see that it's changed this mask here and added it so that it's only putting the color in the shadow. Now, if I wanted to subtract, see, I'll subtract the midtones so that it's really only the shadows, and you can see it now on her mascara and just in the shadows here. And if I look at the mask there, you can see that it's tightened it up so that it is the shadows minus anything mid-tone. So that can really come in handy for when you're like nitpicking certain colors for certain spots. And just to show, I'll replace the mask again and we'll try highlights. In fact, I'll go to really high highlights, which this photo is kind of dark, so none really show up. So I'll go there. Those ones worked. And it's a slight difference, but you can see that the highlights on her face do get a little bit more blue, a little cooler. Now, if I were adding or subtracting from it, just like the subtract, if I were going to add to the mask, if I had the midtones already masked out and I wanted to add a little bit of the highlights and the brighter highlights, then I would just hit add and then choose apply and pick them. Now right now, when you choose to remove the masks, I have a stupidly complicated code that I wasn't really thinking when I did it, I guess, because only a couple days later, after I'd already put the update out, I realized that it could have been a much faster action to run. So when you hit remove channel masks, it says this will remove all the masks in your channel section. So this is all of them right now. So if you've got any masks saved, it will remove all of them. And that won't be on the update. On the update, it's only going to remove the ones that were put there by Luminosity. So in that case, though, just try to leave all the masks alone until you're ready to remove all of them so that it doesn't have a difficult time trying to find them. Okay, so moving on to skin tone. Another thing that will change in this, I'm going to tweak the brightest tones and the darkest tones because when I made them mostly for bright skin or dark skin, but I find that a lot of people like to use some of the light skin on the dark skin because it gives it an interesting effect. But once it hits a certain brightness or darkness, a lot of the color will fall off and it just kind of becomes gray. Now, if you're finding that it's extremely gray, it's probably because you're in sRGB, and I forgot that I had originally created those for Adobe RGB back when I thought it was superior. So for the sake of this, I will just run it and then I'll switch over to the proper color so you can see that it does change. I know she's not the lightest one, so this is where you're going to see some of that graying happen. So I'm going to click that first one and then just choose my full opacity brush, and it already has the mask selected. So I'll just paint all over her face just so I can see the color. Again, I'm not being very precise here. This is just to show where the color is. Like I said, Casper. And there are adjustments that you can do under here, like saturate and desaturate and remove the greens, remove the reds, stuff like that. But it wouldn't be enough because this isn't a proper color space anyway. So I'm going to switch to Adobe, and you can see right away that it brightened it up, but it is still a bit desaturated because of the issue I said before with the highlights kind of trailing off into white. So for her skin tone, she's probably either this third or fourth one. And I know that the fourth one is very sunburned looking, but I do love how the saturation is on the shadows of her nose versus this other one. So I'm going to stick with this one, only I'm going to go over to the adjustment and I'm going to enable the anti-red. And I'm just going to move that slider up. And then I'm going to maybe desaturate it. And I could leave that at full opacity. And so we've got a complete skin tone change here, and then I would just adjust these depending on how much red I wanted and all of that. And then once I'm done, I can adjust the opacity overall because I don't really like to have one solid color for skin. There should be some variation. So I adjusted it, and I'll just merge it down. Oop, not merge it there. Okay, so I also have dew, powder, bronzer, and blush. So these are like makeup terms. This dew one is a little bit, I don't want to say temperamental, but it's like a beta thing. It works for a lot of images and some it just doesn't. It really depends on if the person in the photo was exposed properly and if the color balance is good. So I'm going to run dew. And dew is that little shine that the girls like to have nowadays. So it lets you know what to do. In this step, use the eyedropper tool to select an area on the subject that represents the color you wish to add dew or brightness. So I'm hitting continue, and then I'm going to select what I think are like the highest points. And automatically it just has you choosing one, but you can select this dropper tool and select multiple. It'll just get really, really bright. And you can change, of course, the fuzziness, which I'm going to keep really low for that more actual texture look. That'll be fine. Okay, so you can see here where it put everything. And so what I would do from here is open up the little folder that it created, and you can choose, I have it so that it creates a cooler highlight. So if you just disable this top layer, it'll make it warmer. And then for this down here, you can adjust the mask, or you can do what I do, which is adjust for each skin tone. So I'm just gonna double click it. And on the underlying layer, I'm just going to go until I see it kind of hitting the edge there where it starts to get crispy. And then I'm going to hold Alt and separate these just a little so that it kind of brings out the highlight texture there. So that's how you can get a little bit of extra dew, and then I would just go here with black like the instructions say and just take it away from places that didn't need any more. So you can see I got a little bit more on her cheek there. Next we have powder, which is basically the opposite of the dew. Instead of making things more glossy, it's going to make things a little bit more matte. This should work on every skin tone, but it could also be adjustable. So let me go ahead and hit powder. And again, it creates a black mask for you, so you'll just be painting with a white brush. Now, with this, most of the time I would use just a soft brush and build it up, but just to show you exactly what's being done, I'm going to set it at full opacity. And right now, the actual folder is only at 50%, so it still isn't going to be the strongest, but it's just going to show how it can lift those shadows if you're not wanting a lot of contrast on your subject. So you can see it lifts it quite a bit. So if I were to open it and, let's say I didn't want to actually brighten it too much, then there is the brighten option that you can take away or lessen. And then the tone, so based on their skin tone, it could have made it too orange or too blue. So I'll go ahead and double click that and maybe bring it more toward a neutral color. And then this here is just a matte effect, so I can boost it, and basically it just kind of takes away the shine and also desaturates it a little bit. So you can see without it and with it. I kind of like it either way, so it's cool. I usually go for more of the contrasted bold look, but I kind of like that soft look there too. I would just have to make her eyes a little softer because those pupils are huge. Okay, so moving on to bronzer. Hopefully everybody knows what that is. Basically, it just means she wants to be darker. So again, I'm just going to use my full opacity brush on the mask that it's set up, and I'm just going to start painting. And I'm not being precise, I'm just painting. Get a little bit of that sun-kissed glow. So if I were actually retouching and using this, I could go full opacity full opacity brush and then adjust the opacity of the layers, but usually I would build this up too. I would take a soft brush like this and gently build it up, but instead right now I'm actually gently removing some, just so you can see what it looks like. And then it is adjustable because not everybody tans the same. So when I open it, right now it's got just 2 layers enabled, which is the super bronze and the darken layer. So this is where you'll really have to adjust if the person, I kind of went with a medium skin tone when I was basing this, but if somebody is very, very dark, you'll probably have to just double click on this one and maybe the super bronzer. And what you'll do is just bring these further down, because what it's doing is it's bringing that highlight into the forefront, so that because like I said, as skin gets darker, it reflects more of that light in a more bold, crisp way. So using this, you can create that natural effect that would happen. And this is a bit orange for my taste. So I think, yeah, I'll just keep it off. It's pretty good just going darker for her. And then if it was too orange or too red, there's these quick buttons here if you don't want to actually choose a manual color. The cool thing about this is with the skin tones and everything, because it's in adjustments like this, if you're only painting one mask, you could easily go from image to image and copy and paste this whole group and then just quickly make a new mask and paint in. So if you have multiple photos to do this, it's just a much faster setup than having to manually create every adjustment every time. Okay, last one on the skin is blush. So that's a pretty obvious one too. It's just that little dark redness that happens in the cheeks, right? Whether it's natural or Maybelline. Alright, so I'm gonna click my soft brush because this would just look like a clown with heavy. You know what? No, let's go heavy. Let's go clown. So pretty dark right there. If you open it up, you can see, well, first off, my opacity on the whole group is at 40%. So if it were all the way up, it'd be kind of crazy. And I'm going to adjust a couple of things with the update for this. One is the color that I chose is a little bit too magenta, I think, where most women like to go for a more natural sort of red color. So it will probably be just solid red there. And then it's just set to color and set to 30%. Again, this is usually only about 40. And not just the color, but we've got an actual curves layer to sort of deepen it, because most of the time you'll go for a blush that's a little bit darker than skin tone. So if you did paint a skin tone over the whole picture, then it'll look pretty unnatural if you take away the redness in the cheeks or maybe around the nose. So this would be a good thing to use to pull them back in manually. It's just about where you paint. So now we're gonna go on to the enhancements. The first one I have is eyes, and there will be a few adjustments that I make when I'm coding the update. Pretty much for all of the enhancements, there will be a little bit of difference, so this video will become obsolete in certain parts, but it should all still be very straightforward. Once you learn the basics of my panel, when things change, you'll be able to understand. And if not, I got videos coming now that I got my computer working. Alright, so after I run eyes, it says paint with a white brush on each of the black masks to reveal the effects in the suggested location. So when I open the eyes folder, I've got darken lashes, darken the outer iris, brighten the inner iris, saturate the iris, sharpen the iris, and lashes, and then overall eyes brighten. So I'm just gonna zoom in here, really fast apparently. And let's just choose the darken lashes first. So I'm gonna take just a soft brush, and you don't wanna go huge over it because sometimes if the person's wearing a dark makeup, it'll just darken that whole thing. But I tried to pinpoint it as much as possible so you don't have to use a very specific brush. So I've just got my soft brush and I'm just gonna paint over the lashes, and it should just darken them but leave the rest of it alone. As you can see, it does take a little bit of that crease just because the crease is so dark. So it's up to you if you want to go back and just take it away a little bit, or if it's totally fine with you. And then the next one is darken the outer iris. So this would be better if I had shot this photo with a larger modeling light so that her irises were smaller, giving us more color. But it should still work for an iris that's this thin. So I'm just gonna make my brush smaller and darken the outside. And again, this isn't so much about techniques, it's just about the setups. Okay, and then I'll go down to brighten the inner iris. And then I'll saturate it to see if it'll bring out some of those lovely greens she's got. And I will sharpen it, but I'm not going to sharpen everything, just the iris, because the rest of the picture is really sharp already. Okay, and then we just have an overall brighten, but this photo doesn't really need it, so I think if I do it, it'll just look like they're glowing in the dark. Yeah, so I'm just gonna not do that one for this. And I'll show and hide the entire eyes adjustments. Now, it's usually pretty strong, and I like to pull back the entire opacity of everything. It's really not bad for the rush job that I gave it. So I'm just gonna take it down to like 75. Yeah, why not? And I'm gonna merge that too, just because the more layers I've got with how many programs I have running right now for this video, I need to work in a few layers, I think. If I wasn't going 4K, it wouldn't be an issue. Okay, so same thing with lips, just run it. And again, it just creates a mask. I wonder what you gotta do here. You gotta paint on the lips. So I'm gonna use my full opacity, and I'm gonna make my brush a little bit harder so I can somewhat see a line. And I'm just gonna paint. Now, this will change because I didn't mean for it to actually choose. In the color layer, I have it set to hue. Actually, you know what? Hue is fine. It's the intensity that's a little bit too much. It adds a little too much contrast in a lot of photos, which for this one it looks pretty good, but sometimes you just want that subtle little pop and it's a little bit strong. If you like it, I'll keep the way it is, but otherwise I don't mind changing a few things. Whatever suggestions people have, I have no problem with at least trying to make it work. So right now I just changed the lip color as well. I just selected that hue's little adjustment box and changed the color. So if I zoom out, you can see that I went a little bit more peach. And because I did that to the lips and her lips actually match the eyes, I can take this and go over the eyeshadow as well. So I'm gonna do that, just so we kind of have some continuity here. It looks pretty cool. A little heavy, but not bad, and I'll take down the opacity anyway. Okay, so there's no teeth in this one. There's barely teeth in that one, but you know what? Her eyes in this shot did catch a little bit of yellow here, so I'm just gonna use it for the eyes and, you know, you just put it on the teeth. So when you run teeth, it's just one adjustment, and it's going to select anything that's yellow, but it's going to try to avoid red as much as possible. So I'm using my full opacity brush, and I'm just going to paint over this whole eye, and it took away the little bit of yellow that was there. Now, of course, the more yellow someone's teeth are, the more it'll show up. So you can see if I go over her hair right here, that it does remove the blonde from her hair, but as I get to this red makeup, it completely ignores it. So that's what it should look like when it comes to the teeth next to the lips. It should be able to avoid it pretty quickly. If it's not, you just have to go in the adjustment itself and double click, and then go to, yellows, and then just sort of choose, using this bar down here, where your yellows are that are bugging you. But it's going for pretty much anything that is actually yellow, and it's trying not to touch anything that's at least any kind of pink shade. So if the person's wearing yellow lipstick, then I guess it's gonna be a little bit more of a tedious job, because you'll have to try to just get the teeth and ignore the lip line. But otherwise, I have it so hopefully you can just draw right over lips and teeth, and it'll take away the yellow from the teeth and leave the lips alone. Just to see a little bit more of the yellow removal, I'm going to go over to this hair here. It's actually kind of cool. It's like dyeing it gray. So that's what it would do to your teeth. A nice bleaching. Okay, sharpen and clarify. So they are different, but it really depends on how you want to use them. So for sharpen, I mostly use it for actual bringing out texture. And once you run it, it does that same thing that the clarify does in my quick setup for frequency separation. It makes it so you can see the texture here to pay attention to the haloing, basically. So then you just choose your radius. So if I wanted to sharpen, let's say her lips, I don't want to focus on the skin right now. So if I was sharpening her lips, this would be a pretty good halo amount. You can see it a little bit under the lip there. So I'm going to hit OK. Then using my full opacity brush, I'm just going to paint over it. Now I wouldn't have to use full opacity, but just so you can really see everything that's going on. So you can see it really brought out the lines in her lips. And if I were to plop it over the eyes and maybe take my softer brush and gently put it over the eyebrows, it can really make your subject stand out. Alright, so there's the off and on. Let me zoom in. Okay, so now clarify is set up a little bit differently. It first does the same thing as sharpen, but then it has a second step. So when I hit clarify, again, it'll bring this up. And now what I use this for is actually for helping with sculpting. So I'm going to crank this up pretty high. Sometimes I do just this amount when I'm just focused on getting like highlights in the nose or lips, but I'm just gonna go for an overall sculpt of her face. So I'm gonna go like this and hit OK. And now the next step is running surface blur, because you can often get too much of the little texture popping through. So you can use this surface blur here to make sure that it doesn't. So if I were to hide the preview and show it, on your monitor you might not be able to see exactly what's happening, but on a high-res photo you can definitely see that when I show it, it's taking away that sharpness that was added, because it did get really grainy right here. But sometimes I don't mind the grain, especially when it's going to be on Instagram, because the more texture the better on a small screen. So I'm just going to actually bring these down to 0, well, 1 and 2, so basically 0. And I'm just going to hit OK. And now using my soft brush, I'm just going to paint in where I want to bring out some of that dimension. You might not be able to see what's going on as I'm doing it, but once I show and hide the layers, you'll see. This is really good to use for bringing out shadows and highlights in hair especially. And right now it's set to hard light, but if you wanted it to be set to soft light, then it would be a more natural fade. And then of course overlay, and if you really want it to add a pop of color, I don't have the quick shortcut for it, but go over to vivid light, and then it really is dramatic then, so you'll have to play around with both the fill and the opacity if you want to do it that way. So we're down to the bottom. Woohoo! So we've got file saving methods, and I'm thinking I will definitely update a couple things. The TIFF, you'll be able to do flattened or layered, just in case you were already doing a PSD. And then JPEG, I'll have a couple options there too. So right now, JPEG and TIFF are just flat high-res JPEG and flat high-res TIFF. And then social media, I have multiple choices. So if I hit JPEG, it saves it at the current size, and it just saves it in the folder as a JPEG. It lets you know when it's done, which in a future update I'll have it, so hopefully you can check a box to not have to have this pop up every time. And then if I hit TIFF, it lets you know that the high-res flat TIFF saved to the original location with the prefix F_. This is in case you're working with a layered TIFF file. This will prevent it from overwriting the file you're working on. Now for social media, there is a little drop-up box. And for Facebook and Instagram, I looked up exact settings and color and everything that you would want for maximizing the quality when uploading to each of these sites. So they're using the numbers that were listed there by them. So when you hit Facebook, it'll create one that is saved with FB__. That was an accident, that extra underscore, so in the future update it's just going to be 1. I'll go ahead and hit stop. If I go to this folder, let me see, retouching. I need to sort that folder like crazy. Alright, so if I go in here, you can see that I have F_ right there for my flat TIFF and FB_. So I'm going to open that up so we can see what it looks like. And this does add a little bit of sharpening, and like I said, makes it the proper size for Facebook. So if I'm looking at this photo versus this one, it's definitely much sharper. It brings out a lot of those high textures, which is what you want, because even though it's a little too much texture on my end, once it's uploaded to Facebook, it gets compressed and those textures often get hidden quite a bit, so it's nice to pop them out. Okay, and now for the little bit more complex is Instagram. And I have this cropped at 8:10 because that's what the Instagram vertical is. But just to show vertical and square and horizontal, I'll do the same thing. They just go based on the specifications that Instagram has. So I hit square and it starts me with a crop. So I'm just gonna make it a square crop. Oops. All right, and then I'm just gonna hit the check mark, and it saved it as IG__. Now, it's not gonna save it for each kind right now. If that's a feature you want, just let me know and I'll make it so it saves it as like IG horizontal, IG vertical, whatever. But right now it's just one IG, so it will overwrite if you choose a different setting. So now if I open that picture again, now you can see that IG has been saved here with Instagram's dimensions and everything all set. So it's a much smaller picture because it's meant for phones, so if I zoom in it's going to get a little more pixeled, but looks pretty good, looks pretty sharp. Now if you ever need to contact me real quick, I do have this by Bella Ortiz, the Retouching.0 by Bella Ortiz, and if you click on it, it should bring you to my photography page on Facebook. Though I do kind of prefer if you just message my personal page, because then I get notifications that push through, versus this I have to check them constantly. So you can go ahead and do that. So I hope that this video explained how the panel works. I know it's a bit long and I know I made quite a few mistakes, and I'm just hoping that my ideas got across, and I can't wait to give you guys an update on it and really make it even more bang for your buck. So thank you so much for watching.